we're still trying to figure out how to connect people from downtown Raleigh to Midtown Raleigh and downtown Raleigh to Triangle Town Center. Mm-hmm. And so those are opportunities where really feedback is important and it matters because, again, if you're trying to get to areas more along Atlantic Avenue, or if you're trying to get to areas more along Six Forks or Wake Forest Road, we need to know those things to know if bus rapid transit could serve that area better or if local route is doing a good enough job of serving those areas now.
Hey, Big Idea Raleigh listeners, I'm Dan Bagley, your friendly neighborhood enthusiast and proud City of Raleigh employee. I'm thrilled you're here today because we've received the green light to talk about one of the most crucial aspects of our growing city, transit. Whether you walk, bike, drive, or ride, transportation impacts everyone in our Oak City. To help us dive into this important topic, I'm joined by our producer, Dr. Sarah Glova, who's been helping us bring these conversations to life.
I just have to call out the pun you used earlier. I heard you say green light. I heard it. So I have to use my, I'm buckled up for this conversation.
That's a good one as well. All right, well, let's put the pedal to the metal and kick this into high gear. We're joined by a special guest, someone who is leading the charge in shaping the future of transportation in Raleigh. Het Patel, Transit Planning Supervisor for the City of Raleigh. Welcome, Het.
Hey, good morning, Dan. How are you doing?
Wonderful, wonderful. To start things off, Het, we like to play a little game. 2 facts and a false. And you get to play against Sarah.
Okay.
So I'll present you with 3 facts. You guess the one that's incorrect.
Okay.
All right. Are you ready?
Ready.
Sarah?
Yes, I'm going to try.
All right. I got to tell you, Sarah's pretty good at this. So it must be that doctor in front of the name. All right. Here we go. The United States is a global leader in public transportation efficiency and innovation. 2, Charlotte is home to the Lynx Blue Line, North Carolina's first light rail system. It covers over 18 miles connecting downtown Charlotte to the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. And number 3, Go Raleigh offers free youth transit programs that allow individuals aged 13 to 18 to ride buses for free, encouraging younger populations to use public transportation.
These are tricky. Okay, do you want to go first or do you want me to go first?
I mean, I think I know the answer, so if you want to go first.
No pressure.
Yeah.
So I've been to a Panthers game and I think I was on the light rail in Charlotte.
Okay.
I don't know if it was the first one, but I remember that.
Yeah,
and
that is kind of an interesting.
I've heard about some of the unique Go Raleigh programs. Ooh, does that mean 1 is a false? I want us to be a leader. I want that to be true. I'm going to say 1 is false.
Okay.
I would agree with that. 1 is 100% false. I mean, I think we're trying.
100%. There was like no ifs, ands, or buts. You got
I mean,
this.
I've been to Charlotte as well. I've actually been on the Blue Line, and I know the work they're trying to do in transit to enhance their light rail system as well, add more projects there. Work for Go Raleigh, and so I know that we have a youth pass that does offer free rides for youths between 13 and 18 ages. So it has to be 1. And I mean, again, I think the United States is trying to do better. Most of these cities that have grown or are growing past the highway era are trying to be better about public transportation, but we don't. I wouldn't say that we match the European cities or others that have definitely have better
Not that
public
global
transportation
leader
infrastructure.
Yeah, okay. All right, that's our guess. What do you think? How do you do?
Yeah, basically, I served this up for Het, I guess. So yes, absolutely correct. That is the false one, and for all the reasons. A lot of the European countries just are a little bit further than us with innovation because they've had to, because the way their systems were set up so long ago. The United States is still kind of a baby when you think about all the other countries out there. So, but yeah, wonderful. You guys cruised right through that one. Way to go. Okay, so let's get to know you a little bit better, Het. If you could explain to me, like I'm a 15-year-old kid who just got his driver's permit and we're hitting the open road for the first time, what do you do?
Yeah, so I work in the transit division for the City of Raleigh, and I am in charge of the project called the Bus Rapid Transit Project. We're trying to construct dedicated bus lanes along key corridors in Raleigh to allow for buses to have better speed and reliability and try to get from point A to point B faster. That is a service that'll help a lot of people that currently use the transit system, and we're focusing on corridors that actually have high ridership now. So again, that's going to be something that benefits our existing users as well as changes the dynamic for transit system within Raleigh and helps people that may not take it now look at it as a convenient avenue to make their transportation needs.
And as the non-Raleigh person, the non-Raleigh employee on these episodes, I wanted to call out bus rapid transit. I think I've heard about this around town, but I hear it called BRT a lot.
Bingo.
It's the same thing, right? BRT,
That is correct. That's the acronym. Again, planning professionals and planners love acronyms. We try to shorten things up, and then we have to explain it to people that don't know acronyms, and so then you have to explain the words again. But Bus Rapid Transit stands for BRT, and that is a nomenclature that the Federal Transit Administration uses. Other places in the United States that all have tried to implement this type of service, they all have that acronym that they use.
Well, that's great. And you said that basically the BRT or the Bus Rapid Transit, you aim mostly for heavy trafficked corridors. Is that kind of the idea?
Yeah, so heavy traffic corridors that currently have existing ridership. So Route 15 on New Bern Avenue right now is one of our BRT corridors. That is highest ridership corridor per mile in our existing Go Raleigh system. The southern corridor going out of town of Garner, again, that's a high ridership route on South Saunders. That's going to have a BRT service on South Wilmington Street and then connecting to town of Cary. And then Capitol Boulevard is our highest ridership corridor. It is our longest corridor as well. So that's kind of a benefit of trying to connect more people to more places.
How do you decide what's like high ridership? Like what's that criteria? You know, what's that number, that cutoff?
Yeah, I mean, we look at our entire system as a whole and just kind of compare the routes to each other. So we have a lot of key arterial routes that, again, connect from point A in downtown to outer lying areas of the Wake County area. And then we have some routes that connect crosstown. So those are connecting between routes, and they generally don't have as significant of a ridership as the ones that do a longer distance, connect to more areas.
I feel like you just used a word that I want to know because I love the words. Did you say arterial route? What was that?
Arterial. So that's kind of the roadway nomenclature for roads that are your major thoroughfares, like major roadways. Yes,
it pumps that blood, right? But instead it's pumping
cars.
It is
an arterial for the transportation network. So that's why I think it's gotten that name from that system of human body, where it's like it is a key part of the transportation network. Many cars ride on it. Cool. Many people are on it, and it is a key to get people from point A to point B.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah, I like that. Well, one thing we'd love to know, Het, is a big idea that maybe transit or is working on that is really exciting for you right now.
Yes, I mean, I think just being so close to the Bus Rapid Transit project, I mean, you mentioned the Blue Line Light Rail project for Charlotte.
You're right.
Bus Rapid Transit for Raleigh, for Wake County, for North Carolina. This is the first Bus Rapid Transit project in the state.
In the state?
In the state.
Wow.
Charlotte is actually going to be looking at some as well. Durham is currently looking at some projects that are Bus Rapid Transit. Chapel Hill has a BRT project as well that is in a planning study or design right now as well. So our project on New Bern Avenue is one of the most advanced BRT projects within the state of North Carolina, within Wake County at this point as well, and in the region, in the Triangle. And so we're really close to starting construction on this big idea that will be transformative from a public transit perspective for Wake County and the region.
Wow, we get a lot of big ideas on the Big Ideas Raleigh podcast, but this is one of the biggest.
This is a big one.
I mean, as far as you think of the size of the project.
Right.
Can you help for folks who maybe have heard of BRT but don't maybe know that much about it? Can you help us understand from a time standpoint and from just a size and scope standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, transportation projects, large capital infrastructure projects take a long time to deliver. That's one of the challenges that when you go through planning phases of theory and try to want to do something big, you don't realize how long it's really going to take until you actually embark on that process. So 2016, Wake County passed a half-cent sales tax referendum that added the local funding source for these projects and has the local revenue coming in year after year. And so we're working with those local dollars, but from 2016 onwards, right? So we're in 2024. We're at 8 years now.
Right.
The city was designated as a project sponsor for Bus Rapid Transit in 2018. And so, again, we've been 6 years from that point to have New Bern designed, going through the federal process. Again, the Wake Transit Plan, when it was first developed, assumed that the bus rapid transit projects would have about at least 50% or some level of federal participation to get the project into construction so that we can leverage our local dollars to do more. So if we can, again, get federal grants on these projects, which are competitive projects within the states. And so we have been successful on the New Bern Avenue corridor in receiving about $40 million in federal grants.
Wow.
And then most recently, last year, the Southern corridor received about $85.9 million in a federal grant as well. So again, that helps the local dollars do more because then the local dollars can go in other projects, frequency improvements on the local transportation network, our public transit network.
Wow.
And so, again, there's things that we could do more from that perspective. But that federal process also slows some things down, right? So, again, on New Bern, that was the first time the city, the Triangle area, really was going through that process under the capital investment grant for Federal Transit Administration.
Okay.
And so we learned a lot about that process. It takes some time to show those partners that we're ready to go into construction. They feel comfortable that their investment's going into the right place, that you're not going to hit roadblocks in trying to deliver this project. You've thought about all the risks that are associated with the project. And then they give you the green light, as we were talking about earlier, to move forward with the project and construction. And we're at that stage for New Bern. So we've gotten the green light in August of 22. We have our DOT approvals in place at this point to actually go into construction. And we recently, earlier this year, actually bid the project for construction, and we're about to rebid for construction because we did not receive any bids previously.
I have like 10 questions just based off of what you were talking about. First off, DOT, Department of Transportation, I'm assuming?
That is correct, the State Department of Transportation.
Which leads me to ask a question. You'd mentioned partners, and working with partners. I can only imagine how many different partners you have to work with to do something as sizable as like a BRT. I mean, who are some of the local people that you're working with, and what does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, again, with the Wake Transit Plan as our key funding source here, there are stakeholders related to the Wake Transit side of things. So that would be the Capital Area Metropolitan Planning Organization, Wake County as an entity, Go Triangle as a transit provider that's a regional transit provider in the area. Internal City of Raleigh departments, one of the things that you don't realize when you become a project sponsor and take on this large of a project is there's other departments that this project is going to touch. And there's going to be more people interested in how they can also do some other improvements that are betterments to the city, but not necessarily tied to the project, right?
Yeah.
So we're trying to navigate all of those things kind of together, bring that into a single project, because the community doesn't know the difference, right? When you start construction to the community, if you're doing the utilities work, if you're doing the bus rapid transit project, it's all the same thing from an impacts perspective. They just want to be impacted once and not over and over again from a construction side of things.
That's an interesting point. There's probably so much that goes into such a big project, but from a citizen or a community member standpoint, an orange cone is an orange cone. And so not really knowing whose department that cone belongs to. But I think I've heard about BRT, to Het's point, in so many different circles. I was in a group focused on small business in the area, and BRT came up because there were some potential set-asides to look at community impacts. And I hadn't heard much about that, but it's really interesting that it seems like we're looking at how this is going to affect folks and maybe doing some unique things to try and navigate that.
Yeah, that's accurate. So the city also has a community, public project community support fund identified. I always forget that acronym as well.
That's a tough one.
I'm going to write it down so we can add it up.
So that is essentially for large capital projects like bus rapid transit or some of the projects happening in Dix Park, anything that's kind of over a certain threshold, 50 to 60 million, and has reached a certain level of design and certainty that it's going to happen. The city is looking at how to set aside some funds for neighborhood stabilization, for small business support, and able to help the community while construction happens or even after construction to make sure that the local businesses that we rely on now are still there once these projects actually happen. Because that's essentially the key, is the people that the projects are going to touch and benefit need to be there for when the project's completed.
It's crazy. So I think it's PPCSF, the Public Project Community Support Fund. But the idea that there's going to be grant funds that people can apply for, and that when this project was conceptualized and when future big projects are conceptualized, that money will be built in so that it's part of it. That, just as somebody who loves the idea of looking at this holistically and thinking about businesses and community members and neighborhoods that could be affected, that's really brilliant.
Yeah, actually, the Neighborhood Initiative Fund is one of those funds that are out there currently for neighborhoods to be able to participate. To Het's point, when the BRT is coming, down your block or real close to you, we want to be able to help maintain the stability of that neighborhood, if not strengthen it. So, yeah, that's a great point. To that point, you mentioned two things. I'm going to try to wrap it into one. You said this is one of the most advanced projects out there. And then you also said that people won't even realize that there are other parts to this project that it touches that weren't even intended to be part of the BRT, but it's happening. Yeah. So I think that probably plays a little bit into the fact that this is more advanced, but can you tell me why?
Yeah, I mean, I think that also plays into why it's taken as long as it has, right? So we had coordination efforts to make sure that while we're doing construction for New Bern Avenue, we have an opportunity to upgrade the public utilities infrastructure, right? Sewer and water along New Bern between Tarboro and Raleigh Boulevard. That is aging infrastructure that's been in place for a really long time. That if we're doing construction on New Bern, that it could benefit, the community as a whole to just go ahead and get that construction done from a utilities perspective as well. That makes sense. From a public project community support fund perspective, that money that was set aside is also being utilized to do improvements along Tarboro Street. There's also another part of this process that on the bus rapid transit side, we're using some of that funding to include conduit for fiber. So again, we understand that there are some gaps in the connectivity network for neighborhoods in that area. So having a conduit that puts fiber in that the city controls allows for a third party to later on use it to actually provide wireless internet in that area is
digital
also
inclusion.
Going to help. Yeah.
Wow. So again, a citizen, a community member doesn't know whose orange cone it is, whether it's an orange cone to help with a new road or to improve plumbing or to set up so that a company can come in and bring in fiber. Yeah. It's an orange cone. Yeah. But if the orange cones are going to be there anyway, are there other things that we can be doing while the cones are there? Is what I'm hearing.
Yeah. That's what it sounds like to me.
And we've treated the bus rapid transit project as a multimodal project. For example, on New Bern, we're adding a 10 to 12 foot multi-use path from downtown all the way to Sunnybrook. So that's pretty much the entire length of the corridor coming out of downtown to Wake Med. That currently has some intermittent sidewalks, probably has some bike lanes maybe in the downtown area, but not once you extend past Swain Street or Tarboro Road. And so this will actually enhance that pedestrian bicycle atmosphere for everyone. Even if you're not using transit, you may benefit from this project by just being a pedestrian and a bicyclist on the corridor.
More walkable, rideable city.
I see. This is that moving on from the highway era. Yeah. He mentioned the highway era earlier. That was a really good point, yeah. And now I'm hearing multimodal, which it sounds like that means just multiple modes, so like walk, but is that right?
Yep.
And so, it's the idea that if we're going to be improving a road, let's make sure that's not the only use for it.
All right, so I have to know. Yeah. Let's face it, some of the bus stops you go, they have this little teeny little box. Are you guys going to just do that same little type of bus stop, or is the bus stop going to totally transform as well?
So for bus rapid transit, the bus stops are actually more enhanced stations with more amenities. A lot of the stations will be level boarding. So when the bus pulls up to the station platform, the platform is the same height as the bus floor. You just walk on, walk off. If you have a mobility device, if you have a bicycle, you can board on the bus by just walking it on as opposed to having to walk up to the front of the bus, pull the rack down. It's intimidating for someone that's not a traditional bicycle user, doesn't know how to even navigate that pull lever system that, again, if you've not done it before, it can be intimidating. Right. So as a person who uses bicycles, who's a public transit user as well, one of the first times I did it, I had to ask someone for help. So it's one of those things that, that could be a hindrance for someone that's trying to decide if they want to do that or not do it.
Sure.
And so we're trying to make it more convenient for people to not really have to think about their options, but just know that there's options there and they can do whatever they want to do when they get there. So if you want to leave your bicycle, there's bicycle racks at the stations. You can park it, leave it, and ride the transit if you want to do it that way.
Oh, wow. That's pretty cool.
along with the amenities that I mentioned, the other thing, on bus rapid transit stations, we're going to have more information for people. So again, trying to make it more convenient. The idea for bus rapid transit is there's going to be more frequency. So during your morning and afternoon peak hours is every 10 minutes. So you shouldn't be waiting long. But if you are waiting, there's information for when the next bus is coming. So you don't have to really worry about pulling an app out or figuring out when the next bus is coming. There's also more information from a wayfinding perspective at BRT stations that we're trying to include. So if you've seen the digital kiosks in downtown,
right.
Something similar to that on the station element itself that will help people identify small businesses or where else they can go within the public transportation system from that station. So other routes you can connect to and that type of information.
Will they have video games? Can I play a video game while I'm waiting?
We have not done enough content management systems to know exactly what else we could fit in there, but that is a great idea.
I'm not hearing a no. Sir.
Right. Hey, all right.
I think at this point, there's also an aspect of this where so many people have phones, right? So if you provide free Wi-Fi, then you even have an opportunity to just use your own phone to do whatever you want to do.
That was a good answer. That was sneaky. Nice one there, Het. Hey, you kind of alluded to this about accessibility, and I wanted to know, what are some of the transit initiatives that support accessibility and equity across, the city? Because you were talking about, the bike and bringing the bus to where it's you walk right onto it now. What is that kind of looking like for the city?
Yeah, so when you have federal funding involved in public transportation, ADA, Americans with Disability Act, kind of comes into the forefront. That is a requirement for a lot of capital projects that use federal dollars. And so that means that we have to have ramps on either side of the stations to allow for someone that has a disability to be able to access that more easily. Overall, we're doing a lot of other things to help with accessibility as well. High visibility crosswalks that signalize intersections, having Bluetooth, potential audio kind of connectivity to allow for someone that has vision disabilities to have an app that helps them navigate that system as well. Just in general, from an equity perspective, public transportation serves people that really need it. So what we do is really look at, and the Wake Transit Plan does this, and a lot of other grant opportunities do this. There's always scoring criteria for how projects are competitive based on who they're serving, right? So we're looking at socioeconomic data. We're looking at really what makes sense from a transit-dependent user perspective within the geographic area of Wake County as we try to implement these projects. But we're also doing that on the local network side as well, right? So any shelter improvement that we do now has an ADA landing pad or some sidewalk connections that they fill in to make sure that, again, people that need that service can easily get to it.
That's great. And I can't imagine that's a cheap endeavor.
No, but I think, again, it's built into the capital cost of the project. So we're really working with what we have from a local funding perspective and the federal grants that we can leverage to do those things.
So if we didn't do those things, even though there is a cost aside to them, we get to access these grants because we did them. So what a great investment. And I love the idea of, what's good for some is oftentimes good for all. My older sister uses a wheelchair, and I was never more grateful for the experience of navigating spaces with her than when I started to have to push a stroller around. It's very similar. So sometimes those aspects end up benefiting all of us. It's great to hear that they're benefiting the folks maybe who need them the most, obviously, but it's an interesting idea that sometimes those investments, they really help all of us.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. I mean, I have a kid now as well, and I didn't really think about those things before, but having to lug a stroller around or pick it up from one place to other, and especially if the kid is still sitting in it, that's a challenge. And so, I think that's one of those things where we're doing that for a particular part of the community, but it also benefits others that may have similar uses where their hands are tied and they just have to, be able to use the ramps to do other things. So.
Well, with that, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with the Big Ideas Raleigh podcast. Welcome back to the Big Ideas Raleigh podcast. We are here with special guest Het Patel, the Transit Planning Supervisor for the City of Raleigh. And I want to jump right back into this, Het. I'd like to ask you another question about what challenges you face in integrating new transportation solutions into existing infrastructure. I can't imagine that being easy.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's always trade-offs, right? Like, especially when you're in downtown environment where the curb space is so limited. You're trying to add dedicated bus lanes. There already is parking. There is bike lanes in some areas. So you really have to look at what the priorities are for the multimodal transportation network.
There's that word
There
again.
it is.
I'm learning
There it
so
is.
many
What do the transit buses need? What does the bicycle users need? And you have to pick and choose. I mean, I think there's going to be some corridors that are maybe more priority for transit, and then you have a parallel corridor that has more priority for the bicycle lanes and the parking and other avenues of this curb space use within downtown. So I think that's part of it, is just having to understand what those trade-offs are, getting some community feedback on those trade-offs in helping make that decision. But outside of that, I would say the biggest one is setting precedent. Again, we talked about bus rapid transit being the first in the state of North Carolina. Charlotte probably dealt with some of this as they did their work on the light rail project with the State Department of Transportation. But light rail is a little bit more different in the sense that that entire corridor is dedicated right away for the light rail project.
Right. There's no road.
There's nothing else involved. I mean, yes, you may be purchasing a lot of right of way to do that project. And so there's some budget and kind of, right of way concerns there. But once you have it, then you're not necessarily dealing with the conflict that comes with general users, vehicles, and other things. Whereas for the bus rapid transit project, we have a mixture of dedicated bus lanes in the downtown area up to a certain amount. And then we go back into general purpose traffic. So that means that there's no dedicated bus lanes outside of 440 on New Bern Avenue. And we're operating in current conditions as we normally do now. Like our buses, Route 15 does that every day. But at the same time, when you bring in a bus rapid transit bus doing the same thing, there are some more conversations we have to have with the State Department of Transportation, what their existing rules and guidelines are for what we can and can't do outside of clear zone recovery. So this is some of the challenges.
Okay, I got to ask you, clear zone recoveries?
Right. So
what is that?
that is basically a DOT policy for, things that are within a certain area of the curb space or edge of curb, right? So like, for example, any current bus shelter sort of has to be a breakaway shelter. Okay. So when you have a station that is so close to the traveling lane traffic, it has to be a station that can move if something hit it. It can't be a station that is so rigid or solid that when it's hit, it could be
I did not realize that.
And that's a safety, I'm imagining.
Yeah, it's safety for the person, I guess, driving, but also just kind of people maybe that's waiting there. But that's one of those kind of nuances of which one, whose safety are you prioritizing there in some ways?
Well, I could see how you could get pinned if it didn't move. Yeah. So, it probably.
What a great example of, you were saying trade-offs. And I can see how in the transportation space, you can't really talk about pros and cons because it really is more about trade-offs. Like something could be a pro for one group, but a really serious con for another group. And we're talking about the same thing. Yeah. So it's not that something is necessarily good or bad. It's more, okay, who is this benefiting? Right. And then how can we consider who's being impacted? And you used the word parallel earlier, not to throw it back to like 8th grade geometry, but you were talking about how there were some things that are good for a certain group, but not good for another. And I think your example was maybe this is a space for cars, might not be as good as for pedestrians. And so you talked about something that was parallel. So maybe building something separate, but maybe in a similar avenue. Yeah. I didn't think about this before, but what an interesting industry you're in, because you really can't talk about pros and cons. You have to think about it as trade-offs and stakeholder groups.
Yeah. And I think over time, I would say the policies have changed as well, right? So the State Department of Transportation now has a policy that is called a complete streets policy. So a lot of their projects as well go through this idea of, we're not just doing a transportation project that's focused on moving people or moving cars. It is also focused on how people are interacting with that space and how we can make that an avenue for someone that's walking and biking to also feel safe in that same environment as cars are operating in it. Yeah.
Complete street to get us out of that highway era. I am so proud of myself for not making an Eras Tour Taylor Swift joke yet. I'm trying so hard, Dan. But we're getting out of our highways era and we're talking about complete streets.
We're in our complete streets era.
Yeah, in our complete streets
There's
era.
a ring to that.
I think so. Friendship bracelets are coming. So
there you
there's
go.
one
Hand
more.
them out at all the bus stops. Friendship. Sorry.
The idea of precedent is something you mentioned too. And normally when I think of precedent, I think of like the Law and Order rerun that I watch, right? That's like, there's no precedent for this. It's
Right.
the idea that
lawyers going at it.
right?
Right.
And if they find precedent, what I understand from my legal background, which is watching reruns,
Law and Order.
it's the idea that if a case has shown this before, then we can do that again. And you're saying that applies in a lot of transportation projects. Like with BRT, you mentioned it's the first BRT in North Carolina is the one that's here. And so we're doing a lot of things that maybe haven't been done in the state before. And so if there's not precedent for a project like that, I imagine that there's a little bit of friction as you're trying to figure those things out. You know what comes to mind is, and I hate to bring this up on a transportation podcast because now we're going to get some people upset, but roundabouts.
Oh,
the
boy.
first time you put a roundabout in a community and people don't really know what to do, and but then the 10th roundabout that you put, there's a lot
They
less.
understand it.
I love roundabouts. I love them.
See, you're starting a war. I didn't say whether I liked them or not.
Can I tell you what I don't like though? Chicanes. I don't like chicanes.
I don't even know what that is.
So it's like two little obstacles side by side. So you have to be really careful going around.
To slow people down. In
It's
some
to
ways.
slow people down in neighborhoods.
Oh, got it.
Speed humps, I'm cool with. Roundabouts, I love. Chicanes, not so much.
Okay. So now that we've talked about our transportation,
Yeah, we're gonna have to put chicanes or something about chicanes, on online so people know what it's a weird one. But
I think you talked about sort of best practices, or with it being new to this area, like how do you have those conversations? And what we had to do really was pull from other state Department of Transportations and say, Minneapolis did this BRT here. Their State Department of Transportation allowed this. Like, you have some strict guidelines in your rules, but you could look at this and say, oh, we could do that. Like,
so because we hadn't done it in North Carolina, you all got to look at other.
we had to
states.
show North Carolina Department of Transportation that this can work, or this is how it works.
Yeah.
And, other municipalities or other agencies have done it.
So there was precedent. We just had to go outside the state for
Right.
it, and that was maybe a way to have precedent with some of the stakeholder decision makers. And now maybe there's how do we help community members think about.
And then I think from a larger, and I mean, not necessarily a DOT perspective, but from a state perspective or other municipalities perspective, it's something that we've started. So like Chapel Hill, after we finished our initial conversations with DOT about a memorandum of understanding, Chapel Hill reached out to us about, hey, can you share it so we can use it? And we actually started ours based off of Charlotte's light rail project.
Right.
So like we had to amend it because, again, the Charlotte light rail was probably a little bit more straightforward. Like they knew exactly what was happening. Whereas ours, there's a lot of gray area about who's going to maintain certain aspects of this corridor after the construction happens.
But wait,
So-
I'm excited because what you're saying is somebody used us as precedent. Then we were the Gold Star A+.
And I feel like Chapel Hill now is so connected with our project because they want to know how we are implementing our lessons learned, and they want to kind of do that from the get-go on their project. So, yeah.
You were kind of talking about this, though, and you mentioned this as well, Het, about feedback. And, well, obviously, you're getting lots of feedback, and I imagine the feedback is coming from the public. Yeah. So what does that look like? How does feedback and working with citizens shape transit?
Yeah. So again, I think really understanding where people want to go. I think, we mentioned early on in this podcast or at the start of the conversation we had that we're really looking at where existing ridership is on our network, what makes the most sense from a increased transit frequency perspective. Are people going to benefit from that? At the same time, we have to do public engagement to, again, better understand where people are starting their trips and where they're ending their trips. So we do a origin destination survey every couple of years that feeds into this information of deciding how to prioritize frequency improvements or bus rapid transit projects. And so we're really looking at, again, I think the way to say this is every trip really starts out as a walking trip. So people are walking to that bus stop before they actually ride public transportation. And so it's kind of inherently important to really understand feedback from the community on where the gaps are in that network. How can we get you safely to a transit station, not just a BRT station, any public transit station that you're trying to get to.
Right.
Those are important feedback opportunities for the community to provide because, again, we're locals. We ride the corridors, we live in the area,
Right.
but we still know that there are areas that have gaps that we may just not have heard about. And so there are apps where we have like see, click, fix type of things where you can kind of really point out something that's really wrong in the system and someone can go out and help you fix it quickly.
Is that called do they call that the first mile, or is that what that's called?
Yeah, so the first mile, last mile is how
Okay.
that's referred to in transit. So the first mile of your trip and your last mile of that trip, again, based on high frequency transit services, you expect people to walk about half a mile to those types of services.
So that's the expectation.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then for your general public transportation system, that's about a third of a mile. So again, for something that's the local bus service, that walk shed kind of shrinks a little bit. So people are willing to walk more for a more direct connection that's faster and that's going to get them from point A to point B if they know that, again, that's more reliable and that's going to meet their needs. But then if they have a route that you're going to have to transfer multiple times, then you're probably going to have a shorter walk shed on that.
That makes sense to me. So how are you getting the feedback? I mean, how do you just go sit down in a supermarket and pull a cart around with you and say, hey, what do you think about transit? Or how does that work?
Yeah, so for the origin destination surveys, those are onboard surveys. So there's consultants that are hired to do a survey they're riding the bus,
Really?
getting people on the bus, talking about exactly where their trip started and where they're going to end their trip. So that's a statistically significant survey. I think it's about like more than 1,000 or 1,900 for the last one that they did. So there is a lot of data that comes in there.
Wow.
In general, from a public engagement perspective, I think, the city has done so much in the last couple of years of trying to get better about their public engagement strategies. So I would say, we're trying to meet people where they are. Whenever city's hosting an event that, you hear about and someone reaches out to you about tabling, you say, yes, we're going to do it. We'll be there. We'll share information that
I
we
love
have.
this term tabling. So this is when city departments get a table at an event, I'm guessing. Wow, you all have turned that
you're
into
right. Thanks for reminding me, 'cause
I love that.
I just went right there too. I was like, oh yeah, tabling, of course.
Yeah.
But you're right.
So you're going to events that the city's doing that might have nothing to do with transit, but you're there in case people have questions.
It's any kind of community event that we can kind of piggyback off of and make sure that we're there to help share information as well as get feedback. Again, since 2016 with the bus rapid transit projects, we're at this phase where from a public engagement perspective, a lot more of it is outreach and kind of education as well as sharing information about where the projects currently are. So kind of keeping people informed. Whereas some of the planning level studies, so like, I've mentioned so far the New Bern corridor, the Southern corridor, we have two other corridors, the Western corridor and the Northern corridor. The Western corridor is also in design. So there's some aspect of that that's already decided in some ways and has moved into some level of preliminary design and moving into that federal process now. But the Northern corridor isn't a planning study. We're still trying to figure out how to connect people from downtown Raleigh to Midtown Raleigh and downtown Raleigh to Triangle Town Center. And so those are opportunities where really feedback is important and it matters because, again, if you're trying to get to areas more along Atlantic Avenue or if you're trying to get to areas more along Six Forks or Wake Forest Road, we need to know those things to know if bus rapid transit could serve that area better or if local route is doing a good enough job of serving those areas now. And so we're trying to look at those trade-offs and really decide, again, if there's enough space for dedicated bus lanes to go in these corridors, what do the stations look like? Again, where can they go? And sort of connecting with those large projects.
So with something like New Bern, I imagine there's a certain number of buses, when you do bus rapid transit, are there more buses? I mean, because if you're talking about shortened times, do they just go through stoplights? I mean, what does that look like?
Yeah, so we do for bus rapid transit have more buses, and they're going to be different style buses. So we have 60-foot articulated buses. So if you think about, if you've ever been to an airport where you've ridden from the terminal to a park and ride facility or somewhere where the bus has a connection to it, and it's like a long bus, has a little
kind of looks like an accordion in the middle.
Yes, it has a little joint in the middle that actually turns. It's actually fun to sit in the middle if you have never done that before. I highly recommend it. But honestly, it's a feature that allows us to have, again, bicycles on the inside so we can bring bikes on the inside of the bus. It's almost like a light rail vehicle, has more capacity. We have the interlocking, mechanisms for the bicycles to be inside the bus. We have more capacity. We have doors on both sides of the bus. So again, that allows for us to have design flexibility so the bus can access a station on either side.
That's
and
cool.
so we don't necessarily have a need for that on New Bern, but we will have a need for that on the southern and western corridors where we have a shared median station where, again, an inbound and outbound stop is at the same location. So again, that helps from a convenience perspective. Regardless of which direction you're going in, you go to one waiting area and the bus is going to access that station on both sides.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
I can't wait to ride in the middle. And also, my kids are going to love that.
It does just kind of sound fun, doesn't
Yeah.
it?
Yeah.
And there's a seat there specifically for kids. I think they would definitely enjoy that because you could see everything else moving, but you kind of just rotate. You don't do anything else.
Like the adrenaline junkie seat of the bus riding
I think
system.
of like the Disney World teacup is what's coming to mind. I know it won't be that intense, but
Awesome. Well, we will be right back with the Big Ideas Raleigh podcast. Welcome back to the Big Ideas Raleigh podcast. Het, I'd like to ask a little bit about sustainability. How are sustainability and environmental conditions being factored into Raleigh's transit development?
Yeah. I mean, again, transit essentially is a step in the direction of being more sustainable. You're reducing the vehicle miles traveled, a single occupancy vehicle mile travel, right? So you're trying to get people out of their cars and their commutes and ride transit if that is a convenient option for them. Outside of that, for the bus rapid transit projects and for our overall bus fleet in Go Raleigh, we have a partnership with Raleigh Water on a renewable compressed natural gas project. So if you're not familiar with that, or if that's a big idea that someone needs to come talk about, I think that would be a good sustainability plug, City is using bio waste to convert that into natural gas, and that's going to fuel up to about 70 to 75 buses.
Oh, wow.
And so that's fueling our compressed natural gas buses with renewable natural gas that we are producing ourselves. That's near zero emissions. That's as good as electric really gets in some ways from an electric bus fleet perspective. We do have a few electric buses as well. As the technology advances for the BRT style vehicle, the bus rapid transit style vehicle, we'll look at electric. Again, we have so many projects in the pipeline that by the time we get to the Western corridor, we're going to have a bus fleet for bus rapid transit of about 24 buses. And so we're really going to take a look at that point to see if the technology is advanced far enough for a long corridor like the Western corridor to function on an electric bus. So that's part of it. And then the other thing that we're doing from a sustainability perspective is for BRT stations, we're going to have solar on the roof of the shelter itself, the station. And so that will offset any electric costs that the station has. So
that's great.
Electricity or lighting, charging, phone charging, that type of thing, the connections to the real-time
digital
arrival
screens that you were telling us about. Yeah.
So those would all be powered with the solar that's generating or being captured. It won't be 100% offset just because, with having the amenities that we have at the station, we have to be connected to the grid. We have ticket vending machines at the station. So we have to make sure that those things have power and stay powered. But we will have an offset there of whatever we generate, and that'll be a help.
So in kind of plain language, the stations will have solar. Doesn't mean that they will only operate on solar. And that's from what we would call a resiliency standpoint, right? Like if it was super cloudy for weeks and weeks and weeks, we would still want those ticket stations to work. So it will be connected to the grid, but it's going to be a system where the solar can put energy back into the grid. And so in the end, when you add up all the numbers, it'll be net zero.
As close to net zero as possible.
As close, right? It just reduces the city's electric costs too.
So great.
Yeah, that is awesome. That is awesome. And one thing I just realized, obviously, sadly, I do not ride the bus very often, but I have employees who do ride the buses. And I start thinking about it. There's lots of things to do on the buses. Like when I'm driving in, I have to focus, I have to drive, I'm on the streets. But when you're on the bus now, I mean, I imagine they do have, you can plug in.
I can get so many emails done on the bus.
You can get your emails done. Do they have TVs now?
I mean, there's a digital display.
You got your phone.
You have a TV in your pocket all the time. Yeah.
I'm showing how old I am.
There's a digital display in all of our buses, but they're more used for service announcements and advertisements. So again, trying to get people to know if something is happening in the system that they need to be aware of, closures that are impacting some routes or something like that is probably what we use that mostly for, and then some advertisement.
So you can disconnect.
You can disconnect. I think that's one of the benefits. I mean, before kids, I took transit, 2 buses in from Durham to Raleigh to do that commute, and was able to, like Sarah said, do my emails, do certain part of the work, before you actually get to work.
That's awesome.
That's great.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, looking ahead, what's something, Het, that we haven't asked that you'd love people in Raleigh to know about? What's some of the future work, or just give us your last thoughts.
Yeah, I think the biggest one here is, I mentioned Wake Transit Plan. It was done in 2016. There's a 0.5-cent sales tax that's being used as local tax revenues for transit enhancements within Wake County. In 2021, the Capital Area Metropolitan Planning Organization did a update to that, but that was a smaller update. We're actually the Capital Area Metropolitan Planning Organization, the CAMPO, MPO. Is going into a larger visioning exercise for Wake Transit Plan and what to do with the sales tax funding that's coming in year after year. And so that's going to extend that financial model for transit enhancements in Wake County from the 2030 timeframe to 2035. And so that's the next 5 years of investment. And what does that look like? There's scenarios out there. There's conversations about how we enhance the core frequency network within public transportation. There's options for, outer line community areas, how they can benefit from some micro transit or regional transit projects, as well as regional rail conversations that, the State Department of Transportation last year got $1 billion grant for the project from Raleigh to Wake Forest and to Richmond that they're continuing to advance on. So there's a lot of conversations overall on the transit side that there's still some opportunities for feedback to stay plugged in on and to provide people an avenue to, again, have their voice be heard.
And what's the easiest way if somebody was interested in participating in a visioning exercise or just sharing feedback? You mentioned that there are the surveys, like the origin destination survey that y'all run, but...
So those would be on the buses, but for this particular update to the Wake Transit Plan, my recommendation would be to go to the Capital Area MPO website. They probably have a specific page for the Wake Transit Plan update that's happening. They are, I believe, fall or early 2025 is a window for the next round of engagement that they're going to be embarking on. Okay, great. Well, just from kind of producer notes standpoint, we can make sure to find that link for the Campo resource, have that in there. And then we'll also put links for that Public Project Community Support Fund if folks want to read more about that. And then what is your thing that you like that's not a roundabout? Say it again.
Chicanes.
Yeah. See, I don't even know. I wrote down like my phonetic idea of how to spell that.
No.
We'll put a link to what that looks like in case anyone like me has never heard of Dan's least favorite.
While we're talking about links, I think one plug for the City of Raleigh website on the BRT page, we have a video that we did last year.
Oh, that's right.
Or 2 years ago, maybe at this point, when New Bern was far enough advanced in design that we have 3D rendering model of New Bern Avenue that shows how bus rapid transit will transform the corridor, how the multi-use path, the multimodal components of the project, the solar component of the project, as well as just how general bicycle or pedestrians can actually access the bus rapid transit stations. And so it's a neat video. I think it's like 3 to 4 minutes
It is a cool video.
Definitely put that in there. Video.
Well, Het, I want to thank you so much. You made it to the checkered flag.
I'm a little bit more relieved now. I can kind of
And Sarah, thank you again, as always, for your wonderful conversations.
I had so much fun. My wheels are turning.
Thank you guys for having me.
Thank you. And thank you for listening to or watching this podcast. Give us a follow. Find the Big Ideas Raleigh podcast on any podcast app or on YouTube. We've got more great episodes coming your way as we dive deep into the heartbeat of your Oak City. And hey, if you have ideas for your podcast, let us know. Visit our podcast page to learn how you can share your ideas with us. We'd love to hear from you. A special shout out to the production team behind this podcast, Earfluence, a Raleigh-based podcast production company. Learn more at earfluence.com. This podcast was brought to you by the City of Raleigh's Office of Strategy and Innovation, also known as the Office of Yes and the City of Raleigh's Communication Department. I'm Dan Bagley, and we'll see you next time on the Big Ideas Raleigh podcast.